Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 58 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is the little things. Our quote of the day comes to us from Bo Taplin. Whoever said the small things don't matter has never seen a match start a wildfire. I'm excited for today's episode. Our guest is a man of many talents, and in this episode, he touches upon some very basic, yet I believe often overlooked important basics for success. A serial entrepreneur, a New York Times best-selling author, speaker, and social media extraordinaire, this episode is full of useful information. I would like to introduce Dave Kerpen. Dave, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it. The honor is all ours. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our podcast and our company is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves or their dreams. So I was curious if you have either a story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and you didn't quit.
Sure. I mean, the toughest time in my life actually was the time after I met this woman. I was working with her, and we were sharing an office, and I fell madly in love with her. And there was only one problem, which was that she was married already. And that turned out to be a pretty big problem. And it was really hard for me to, I wanted her to leave her husband, but you know, she wasn't ready to and didn't want to. And it was really anxiety producing and challenging time. But I learned after a lot of work and a lot of practice to let go and to have faith in the universe and in greater good, and to let go of what I couldn't control. And I continue to this day to look at the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, as a really, really powerful way. That's, of course, from Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs, but I have always found it to be really, really valuable and meaningful for me. And as it turns out, a couple of years later, that woman got a divorce on her own, and we ended up dating, and we got married, and several beautiful children later, and successful businesses later, and successful books later, and most important, 11 years of marriage later. I couldn't be happier. But I look back to that initial time of letting go as a really important time in lesson in perseverance.
That is quite a story. I did not know the full backstory, but I don't know how many people could have let go in that extent. But I think the fact that what is the saying is, if you love something, let it go, and if it's meant to be, it'll come back, or something like that.
That's right. That's right. And so often we try to control things, but the big lesson is to not try to control things, because there's so many things that we can't control, and to let go of those things that we can't control, knowing that, yeah, like you said, if it's meant to be, it will work out the right way.
No, that's a great story, and that takes no quitting and perseverance to a different level, and it has a little different spin on it. But you had mentioned books, and I was curious. A lot of our listeners are into personal development and looking to improve different areas of their lives. I was curious if during that time, or maybe recently, you've read a book that had a positive impact on your life that you'd like to share or recommend to our listeners.
Sure. I am a big fan of books and a big fan of authors. I would say there are really dozens of authors that I would mention. A few of my favorites are Adam Grant, whose books, Originals, Give and Take, and most recently Option B, are all quite terrific. Seth Godin is a terrific inspirational author in the marketing space. Pat Lencioni in the leadership space. Malcolm Gladwell, Jim Collins, Sheryl Sandberg, Jeff Gitomer in sales, John Maxwell in leadership. The list goes on and on, but there's lots of really terrific inspirational folks. Probably Adam Grant is my all-time favorite.
Well, you listed quite an impressive resume as far as successful authors. I was curious, was there somebody that got you into reading, or is it more something that just happened over time?
Yeah, good question. I think it just happened over time. I think probably when I started my first business now a little more than 10 years ago with my wife, I realized that there was just so much I didn't know. And, it's funny, the older I've gotten, and frankly, the more successful I've gotten, the more I've realized how little I actually know. And the part of the solution to that is to read as much as I can. So I don't get to read as many books as I would like, but I certainly read a ton. Blog articles and tweets, and I read more now than I think I've ever read in my life, and I continue to try to flex that reading muscle.
No, I think that's a great point you bring up, and it's difficult to read books specifically, and some people are traveling and doing things, and I think the one thing we talk about quite often on our show is in today's day and age with technology, there's such a quick and easy opportunity, like you mentioned, whether it's articles or blogs or videos or things. There's so much opportunity to access knowledge in today's day and age where you don't need it from a traditional book. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form knocking traditional books, because myself, I happen to like traditional books as well. But my point is there's such a huge opportunity to get access to different information, and I think you touch on something that's important. Speaking of books, I believe you might be a New York Times best-selling author, so if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your writing with our listeners, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Sure. Well, I mentioned the reading muscle. I think the other muscle that's been really valuable for me in my businesses and in my life is the writing muscle, and I've been writing pretty consistently for the last just 7 years or so. My first book, Likeable Social Media, became a instant New York Times bestseller and has been translated now to 13 languages and done really well all over the world. That's a book about social media for marketing purposes, business purposes, branding purposes. And then since then, I've written Likeable Business, which is a broader book at building, meant to help people build their businesses. And then most recently, The Art of People, 11 Simple People Skills that will get you everything you want. And that's my broadest book yet. And it's really all about improving our people skills and our communication skills.
You touch on some pretty interesting topics, and I think I would definitely recommend our listeners to follow you and to check out some of those books, because you do touch on quite a wide range of things. And obviously, you've been doing this for 7 years now, and clearly you're not only testing, but you're pushing your writing muscle, and I commend you for that, because I know a lot of people have a book inside them as far as conceptually, but they don't end up doing it. So you've obviously done that now for 7+ years, so I commend you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love helping friends. I think I'm very proud of the fact that I've helped a couple dozen friends bring books to market and get bestsellers, and now actually I'm most focused on my wife, and her first book comes out in January, and it's called Work It, Stories from the Boldest Women in Business. And she interviewed Sheryl Sandberg and Barbara Corcoran and Reshma Saujani and quite a few very successful women. And so I'm just so excited to be able to share that experience with her now and help her, and actually help anyone that wants to. I do free consulting. People have to be super patient, but I have office hours every Thursday, and you can schedule those at scheduledave.com. And like I said, it's about a 9-month waiting list right now, but I'm happy to meet with folks and talk about helping them get that book out of them or anything else that they want to talk about.
We might have to talk offline on that, because I am in the process of writing my book now. I'm probably 60% through, so I might have to pick your brain at some point about that.
Well, that's terrific. And it's probably the hardest thing I ever did professionally was my first book. But once I got through it, I got a little bit better at it. And, it's like anything else. Practice helps you improve quite a bit.
No, definitely. So I'll just send you my transcript, and if you just finish the next 40%, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Sure. You want, and I'll get you a publisher, an agent, and a publisher, and a bestseller too.
All right, that's a verbal commitment, so thank you for that, sir.
It's being recorded too.
One of the things we do on every show is we utilize a daily quote, and I was curious if you have a favorite quote.
Yeah. So my favorite quote is from Seth Godin, one of the authors that I mentioned earlier. And the quote is, "How dare you settle for less when the world has made it so easy to be remarkable?" And I love the quote because it reminds me and it reminds others that it actually isn't that hard to be remarkable. And a lot of my writing and work is around doing the little things, listening, being praising people, being high energy, really supporting others. When you go out of your way to do these little things, you can actually be remarkable in a world full of mediocrity and stand out. And I've been very fortunate to build a career and a life around doing those little things. And I think that Seth's quote really speaks to me.
If you don't mind me asking, where did that come from? Was that something that you were taught, your parents, or was it just something that you figured out along the way in your business life, the little things?
Yeah, not my parents. Unfortunately, I don't have the greatest of relationships with them. But what I would say, of course, now that I said that, I'm sure that my mom will listen to this interview and be upset. But I do love your mom. I would say, I've been very, very blessed with some wonderful mentors who have taught me through the years. Jim McCann, the founder and chairman of 1-800-Flowers.com, has been a wonderful mentor to me. Vern Harnish, one of the founders of Entrepreneurs Organization, has been a wonderful mentor to me. And yeah, I think I've learned from some great business people the importance of doing those little things.
No, I think it's important. It's something we talk about quite often with our company, No Quit Living, is it's mastering the little things. And if you do the little things exceptionally well, they lead to all the big and greater things. So I'm glad you briefly touched on that. Here's an interesting question for you. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, that's funny that you asked that, because I actually recently wrote an article called Advice for My 21-year-old self. So now 20 is a year earlier. Let me get to this real quick and remind myself what I wrote and try to give you one out of the, I think I put 5 to 7 pieces. Here it is. Oh, look, one of the fun things I like about the internet is you look back and you see, like, I wrote this article for Inc.com, and I guess it got picked up by Microsoft, because now when I Google it, that's the first thing that pops up. So the number one thing that I wrote when I wrote this article just a couple months ago was it's much better to live in the present than in the past or the future. I think that so often it's easy to slip in, and especially when you're younger and less experienced in life, it's easy to slip into thinking about the glory days and living in the past, or thinking about what you need to do and what's coming and dreading what's coming and sort of living in the future. And living in the past can lead to depression, and living in the future can lead to anxiety. So the more that we can live in the present, I would remind myself, the better.
No, that is a good piece of advice, and congratulations on Microsoft picking up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the internet is an amazing thing, and the more you write, the more opportunities just sort of get opened up for you. My 7th point, I haven't touched upon this yet, but let me just mention this because it's a really important part of my life too. My last point in this article was that gratitude is the best drug on the planet. And it's only within the last few years that I've begun writing handwritten thank you cards every day and making gratitude part of my regular day-to-day life. And I find gratitude is truly the ultimate drug, the ultimate antidote, and the ultimate mood improvement mechanism, because it just puts us, the more we experience gratitude and feel gratitude, the better mood we'll be in. And of course, there's no negative side effects.
That is true. I have not heard of a negative side effect for gratitude, and that's something that we talk about as well. And it's ironic that you mentioned the thank you note. It's something that we do at our company quite often, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't remember per se to do, but it does have a huge impact. And I was just talking to a client yesterday, And they were telling me that they couldn't even remember the last time they got something that was handwritten in the mail because all they get are bills and notices. So I think not only is it something that is forgotten, but it's something that does have a profound impact on people.
Indeed, it's extremely powerful. And I'm not talking about a email thank you or text. I'm talking about truly, like you said, a handwriting.
Yep, handwritten notes and actual stamps too. So we definitely subscribe to that at No Quit Living. So I wanted to ask you an interesting question, and maybe you've heard this before, but if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
So it's funny, you keep asking me questions about stuff that I've actually literally written about. So Oprah Winfrey is the person that I would have coffee with or dinner with, lunch with, etc. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her as a truly self-made billionaire and media mogul, and she's taken her personal brand and brought it to basically the highest level possible. So I am truly inspired by Oprah.
No, she is somebody that I look up to and I admire, and we've talked about her probably on 4 or 5 episodes. And one of the things that we often talk about when it comes to Oprah Winfrey is she's very specific that the most successful people in all walks of life have failed more often than everybody else. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that, and they look at the overnight success. And I forget what podcast I was listening to, but it was about probably 5 or 6 months ago, and they were talking about overnight success. And the guest on this podcast said, I am an overnight success myself. It was a 10-year overnight success. So I think Oprah is a wonderful person because she definitely understands how success is so important to the analysis of failure and how and why failure is so important to ultimate success. And as you mentioned, she's a self-made billionaire, and she's given back to so many different people in so many different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And so such an inspiring story and human being.
I wanted to ask you, Dave, if there's anything that you're working on that's coming out in the near future that you'd like to reference or speak to our listeners about real quick.
Well, one new interest is around online influence, and I'm writing a couple books right now, but one of my next books is going to be about the 7 pillars of influence. And so I'm writing about what I have learned and what's helped to make me pretty influential in terms of writing books, writing articles, public speaking, personal branding, public relations, and social media and video. And so I've been working with some senior executives, some corporate executives on helping improve their influence. And I think it's a really interesting topic. I am a believer that anyone that puts their mind to it can build their brand and become a lot more influential online.
No, I agree, and I think in today's day and age, there are just so many improvements along the way. Maybe a different question, but you've talked about social media and influence. Is that something that you were always interested, or was it something that you kind of fell into in the sense of just realizing there was an opportunity to be helpful?
Well, social media, of course, I couldn't have always been interested in it because it literally was just born in the last 10, 12 years. I've always been interested in influence. I've always been interested in sales and marketing. I've always been fascinated by those things. I've always been interested in education. I was a teacher for 3 years. I studied education in college. I am on the school board of my local in my town today. So, I would say that, education and marketing and sales are probably my 3 biggest professional passion points for, the last, I guess, 25, 30 years or so.
Here's a different question. Before we let you go, I wanted to ask Dave if you have some parting words you'd like to share with our listeners.
Parting words. Well, I'll go back to Seth Godin, and paraphrase the quote that I shared from him. And I just think that, my brands and businesses are include the word likable. And I think that the secret to success is in life and in business is quite simple. Just be likable.
No, that is a good point. And I think, unfortunately, with technology today, I think a lot of people probably miss that in regards to why and how it's so important, not only to be likable, but to establish relationships in all walks of life, but especially when it comes to businesses. I think some people and some companies, I don't know if I want to say they gloss over it, but I think sometimes they don't spend enough time on the relationships and obviously establishing what becomes likable and why somebody would or would not do business with somebody. I think it comes down a lot of times to actually being likable and establishing that relationship.
Exactly, and people are in a rush to build a business and close sales and make money, but they sometimes move too quickly beyond establishing relationships and establishing trust.
So here's a question for you. For those of our listeners that are interested in following you or connecting with you, what is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Well, one of my personal core values is responsiveness. So if people have questions for me today, tomorrow, for the rest of your life, feel free to tweet me or hit me up on LinkedIn or Facebook. Very easy to reach, just at my name, Dave Kerpen. You can also Google all things Likeable and find me in my books that way too.
Well, listen, Dave, I truly appreciate not only your time, but also what you share with us today. And I look forward to our listeners following and connecting with you. And back to just a plug for your wife is if you could just share again her book title as well as her name for the books for those listeners that do want to check out her book. I believe you said that gets released in January of 2018.
Yeah, so it's available in bookstores everywhere, January 9th. It's called Work It, Secrets for Success from the Boldest Women in Business by the beautiful and brilliant Carrie Kerpen.
Shameless plug there. You'll earn some browning points, so I'm sure she'll appreciate that. But listen, Dave, again, I truly appreciate your time, and I look forward to hopefully speaking with you soon.
It's my great pleasure. And remember, no quit.
To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, the little things, I truly believe that Dave delivered. One of the best parts of hosting a podcast is meeting and getting a chance to connect offline with many of our guests. Dave touched upon the importance of reading, as well as the huge impact writing has had on his career. He briefly spoke about the importance of letting go and not worrying about the things that you can't control. Dave also mentioned the importance of being likable and not always rushing, and how establishing relationships is something that often gets lost in today's fast-paced world. Dave shared a Seth Godin quote that I would like to repeat. How dare you settle for less when the world has made it so easy for you to be remarkable? So in our parting words today, the question we would like to pose to our listeners is very simple. Are you settling? If so, why? Our call to action is very simple. Don't settle. If you have the chance of being average versus great, don't ever settle for average when greatness is within reach. Go attack today and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.